They say blood is thicker than water, but that just means it is harder to wash off when your family stabs you in the back. I am Brandi. For years, I was the invisible daughter, the silent background noise to my sister's golden life. My parents skipped my graduation for a broken fingernail, yet expected me to bankroll their bad decisions. They did not realize that by ignoring me, they were giving me the perfect vantage point to document their ruin. I did not scream when they betrayed me. I wrote a book that burned their world to the ground. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. Let us go back to the night the ink finally dried on their destruction. The air inside the ballroom of the Pierre Hotel smelled of expensive perfume, old money, and the distinct metallic tang of desperate ambition. This was the Golden Quill Awards, the night New York's literary elite gathered to pat themselves on the back for being clever. I stood near a pillar wrapped in velvet, nursing a glass of sparkling water. I had no intention of drinking, watching the room with the detached clinical interest of a surgeon surveying a patient. My editor had told me to mingle to press the flesh to act like the breakout star everyone claimed I was. But I wasn't here for the accolades. I was here because this ceremony was the final act of a play I had been writing in my head for 7 years. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, a severe black silk that felt like armor. Somewhere in this room, people were whispering about my debut novel, The Glass Menagerie of Suburbia. They called it hauntingly realistic and a masterpiece of domestic psychological horror. They had no idea that for me it wasn't horror, it was a transcript. Fiction, I had learned, is just the polite way of telling the truth when nobody is willing to listen to the facts. The applause from the stage washed over me, sounding distant like the roar of the ocean in a seashell. It triggered a memory, sharp and sudden, pulling me away from the crystal chandeliers and back to a parking lot in mid-July 7 years ago. The heat had been oppressive that day, a humid blanket that made my polyester graduation gown stick to my skin. I was standing on the asphalt outside the university stadium, clutching a diploma that read Summa Cum Laude. I had worked 2 jobs to pay for the tuition my parents claimed they couldn't afford, fueled by caffeine, and the naive belief that if I just achieved enough, if I just shone bright enough, they would finally look at me. I scanned the crowd of proud families looking for the familiar silver sedan. I checked my phone. 2:00 p.m. The ceremony was over. The parking lot was emptying. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. I remember the surge of relief, the foolish thought that perhaps they had just been stuck in traffic. "Brandi." Her voice was breathless, tight with stress, but not for me. "We're not going to make it, honey. We're at the urgent care." My heart stopped. "Is Dad okay?" I asked. "It's Tiffany," my mother said, her voice dropping to that reverent whisper she reserved for my younger sister. She was getting ready for her sorority rush photos. You know how important those are for her networking, and she had a crisis. "She broke a nail, Brandi. Right down to the quick. She's hysterical. We couldn't leave her like this." I stood there, the sun beating down on my black cap, processing the absurdity of the sentence. I had just graduated with highest honors. Tiffany had broken a fingernail, and they had chosen the fingernail. "It's fine," I said, my voice sounding hollow like it belonged to a ghost. "I understand." I hung up before she could offer a hollow apology. That was the moment the realization settled over me, cold and heavy despite the summer heat. I wasn't the black sheep of the family. Black sheep are noticed. They are yelled at, worried over, prayed for. I was something far worse. I was the invisible sheep. I was the furniture. I was the background noise in the glorious Technicolor movie of Tiffany's life. As I stood there, blinking back tears that I refused to let fall, I saw movement in my peripheral vision. About 50 yards away, sitting on a concrete barrier, was Sarah, my college roommate. She wasn't looking at her phone. She was looking at me. She had seen me waiting. She had seen the phone call. She saw the slump of my shoulders. She didn't wave or approach. She just bore witness to my erasure. That silent acknowledgement saved me that day. It confirmed that I existed. Snap back to the present. The applause died down. I took a sip of the water. That graduation day was the wound, but the infection didn't set in until 6 months ago. I had been visiting my parents' house, a rare occurrence, when Tiffany made her grand announcement. We were sitting in the living room, surrounded by photos of Tiffany at prom, Tiffany at cheer camp, Tiffany winning a participation trophy for flute. There were no pictures of my graduation. Tiffany, now 26, and drifting aimlessly between career paths funded by our parents' retirement savings, clapped her hands. "I have big news," she squealed. "I'm going to be a writer just like Brandi, but for real people." She explained her plan to launch a mommy blog and a memoir titled The Perfect Nest. She was going to detail our idyllic upbringing, positioning herself as the product of a perfect American family to secure brand deals for baby products despite not yet being pregnant. She wanted to monetize a lie. I looked at my parents. My father was beaming, already reaching for his checkbook to fund her web design. My mother was nodding, eyes misty. "It's a wonderful idea, Tiff. You have such a beautiful story to tell." That was the trigger. It wasn't just that they loved her more. It was that they were willing to rewrite history to suit her vanity. They were going to sell a fantasy of a loving, supportive family, erasing the neglect and the favoritism. They were going to profit from the very dynamic that had left me standing alone in a parking lot. I realized then that screaming would do no good. Confronting them would only make me look jealous. I needed a different weapon. I needed to beat her at her own game. I went home that night and didn't sleep. I opened my laptop and started typing. I didn't write a memoir. That would open me up to lawsuits. I wrote fiction. I created a character named Brittany, a golden-haired narcissistic sociopath who drained her family dry while smiling for the cameras. I created parents who were so desperate to maintain appearances that they cannibalized their other children. I poured every slight, every overlooked achievement, and every specific damning detail of Tiffany's manipulative patterns into the manuscript. I called it The Glass Menagerie of Suburbia. It flowed out of me like a purge. I wrote with a cold, terrifying clarity, predicting exactly how a character like Brittany would escalate when given a platform. When the manuscript was finished, I didn't send it to the big publishing houses that take months to respond. I sent it to a specific boutique press in the city, one known for gritty, uncompromising realism. I addressed the query letter to the head publisher, a woman known only as S.J. Vance. I knew she would understand the story. I knew she would understand the silence of a parking lot in July. I clicked send, and for the first time in 7 years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt like the hunter laying a trap. The narrative was no longer theirs to control. It was mine. The offices of Ironclad Press were tucked away in a converted warehouse in the meatpacking district, a stark contrast to the marble-floored corporate skyscrapers where my sister dreamed of being photographed. Here, the air smelled of fresh ink and old coffee, a scent that grounded me. I sat across from S.J. Vance, the publisher, who had responded to my query within an hour. Her office was sparse, dominated by a massive oak desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Vance herself was an enigma wrapped in a tailored blazer. She had a sharp, angular bob and glasses that caught the light, obscuring her eyes, but there was a familiarity in her posture that I couldn't quite place. She didn't treat me like a debut author begging for a crumb. She treated me like a co-conspirator. She tapped a manicured finger on my manuscript, The Glass Menagerie of Suburbia, which lay between us like a loaded weapon. "It's viscous," she said, her voice a low, smooth alto. "It's precise. Most people write revenge fantasies with a sledgehammer. You've used a scalpel. You know this character, this Brittany, inside and out." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "I've studied the archetype for a long time." Vance leaned forward, the light finally hitting her eyes. They were warm, surprisingly so contrasting with her steely professional demeanor. "We're going to fast-track this, Brandi. The market is starving for a villain they can truly hate, and you've given them a narcissist so believable she breathes on the page. But I have one question regarding the plot. In Chapter 12, the character Brittany organizes a charity fundraiser for a sick neighbor, then funnels the donations into a shell account to pay for a luxury vacation to Cabo. That's specific. I allowed myself a small, dry smile. It's predictive modeling, Ms. Vance. The character is based on a personality type that lacks impulse control and believes they are entitled to compensation for their mere existence. If the real-world inspiration ever gets access to public funds, that is exactly what she will do. I'm just writing the script before she acts it out. Vance stared at me for a long moment, then picked up her pen. I love it. We print in 3 months. The timeline was aggressive, but it had to be. I was racing against a deadline set by my own family. While I was editing Galleys with Vance, Tiffany was busy constructing her mommy blog empire. She called it the perfect nest. The irony was suffocating. Our home had never been a nest. It had been a stage where the actors were underpaid and the director was prone to hysteria. I was deep in the revisions of my own climax when the invasion happened. I lived in a quiet, orderly apartment on the Upper West Side, a sanctuary I had paid for with my own salary as a technical writer. My parents had never visited. They claimed the city gave my mother migraines. Yet there they were on a Tuesday evening banging on my door with the entitlement of landlords. When I opened the door, my mother swept in a cloud of cloying floral perfume trailing behind her. My father followed carrying a box of pastries, as if a dozen stale donuts could buy my compliance. "Brandi, darling," my mother exclaimed, bypassing a hug to inspect my living room with a critical eye. "It's so small. But cozy, I suppose." My father set the box down on my pristine coffee table without a coaster. "We need your help, sport," he boomed, using the nickname he only employed when he needed manual labor or tech support. "Tiffany has finished her book, her memoir." My stomach tightened. "Already?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "It's been 3 months." My mother beamed, her face glowing with a pride she had never once directed at my academic achievements. "She's a natural, Brandi. It just flowed out of her. It's brilliant, truly moving. But—" She paused, examining a speck of dust on her sleeve. "The computer underlines things in red sometimes, and she's not sure about the, what do you call them, the dots with the tails. Commas," I said. "You mean commas?" My father chuckled, waving a dismissive hand. Right. Grammar. That's your thing, Brandi. You've always been the bookworm. We need you to polish it up for her, make it shine. She's going to self-publish next month to launch the blog." The audacity was breathless. They weren't asking me to read it. They were asking me to ghostwrite the technical competence my sister lacked for free to launch a career built on lies about our family. "I'm actually on a deadline for my own book," I said, testing the waters. My mother's smile faltered just for a second before returning with a harder edge. "Oh, your little fiction story, that can wait, honey. This is Tiffany's career. She's the face of this brand, Brandi. You're the support. That's just how the dynamic works. We all play our parts." There it was, the thesis statement of my entire life. She is the star. You are the crew. A younger version of me would have screamed. I would have thrown them out. But I was playing a long game now. "Leave it here," I said, gesturing to the thick stack of papers my father had pulled from his satchel. "I'll look it over tonight." My parents exchanged a look of triumphant relief. They didn't thank me. They just assumed my servitude was the natural order of things. "Make sure it sounds professional," my father said as they headed for the door. "We've leveraged the house to pay for her marketing package. We need this to hit big." The door clicked shut, leaving me alone with the manuscript. I sat down and began to read The Perfect Nest. It was worse than I imagined. The prose was purple and clunky, filled with mixed metaphors and self-aggrandizing anecdotes, where Tiffany was always the hero or the victim, never the villain. But as I read, I realized something dangerous. Tiffany hadn't just lied about our family. She had included anecdotes about our neighbors to spice up the drama. She wrote about the Hendersons next door, claiming Mrs. Henderson had an affair with the pool boy, a rumor that had been debunked years ago. She wrote about her high school teacher, Mr. Clark, implying he had been fired for drinking on the job, when in reality, he had retired due to illness. These weren't just stories, they were actionable libel. She was defaming real people with real lawyers. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The editor in me, the sister who had spent a lifetime fixing Tiffany's messes, wanted to highlight these sections and write, "Remove, legal liability" in big bold letters. I could save them. I could tell them that leveraging their house for this was financial suicide. I could scrub the book clean, leaving it boring, but safe. But then I looked at the calendar. I thought about the graduation ceremony. I thought about the little fiction story comment. And I made a choice. I didn't touch the libel. I didn't delete the defamation. I corrected the commas. I fixed the spelling of scandalous. I polished the sentence structures so that her lies flowed smoothly and were crystal clear to anyone reading them. I handed her the rope, tied the knot, and tested the strength of the beam. The next morning, I emailed the file back to my father. "It's ready," I wrote. I didn't change her voice. "It's pure Tiffany." He replied instantly, "Great job, sport. We knew we could count on you." The guilt I expected never came. Instead, I felt a cold, hard resolve. I called Vance immediately. "We need to move the release date up," I said. "She's launching next month." Vance didn't ask why. She just heard the tone in my voice. "I'll call the printers. We'll do a digital release 2 weeks before hard copies hit the shelves. We'll beat her to market by 3 weeks." The tension in the following weeks was a physical weight. I watched Tiffany's Instagram page as she teased the release of The Perfect Nest. She posted photos of herself posing with a laptop, looking pensive and writerly, captioning them with platitudes about speaking her truth. She had no idea that her truth was a legal grenade. Meanwhile, Vance and I were quietly seeding advanced reader copies of The Glass Menagerie of Suburbia to influential reviewers. We didn't market it as a family drama. We marketed it as a psychological thriller about a parasitic socialite. The buzz started to build. People were talking about the villain Brittany. They called her deliciously toxic and frighteningly real. 1 week before my book dropped, I went to a bookstore and saw the coming soon poster for Tiffany's memoir. It was a glossy photo of her face airbrushed to oblivion. Next to it, the shelf talker for my book had just been placed. It was a stark black cover with a single cracked mirror. The two books sat side by side, a silent duel between the sanitized lie and the ugly truth. I bought a calendar and hung it in my kitchen. I circled the date of Tiffany's launch in red ink. Then I circled the date of my own launch in blue. The trap was set. My parents had leveraged their home. Tiffany had staked her reputation. And I had the blueprint of exactly how it was all going to fall apart. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and watched the city lights, waiting for the first domino to fall. The planning phase was over. Now I just had to wait for the world to read the book and realize that the monster in my fiction was the girl next door. The launch of The Glass Menagerie of Suburbia was not a fireworks display. It was a gas leak. Silent, pervasive, and inevitably explosive. When the book dropped 3 weeks ahead of Tiffany's memoir, I didn't hold a launch party. I simply sat in my apartment and watched the Amazon rankings climb. S.J. Vance had marketed the book brilliantly, targeting fans of psychological thrillers and domestic noir. The reviews started pouring in within 48 hours. "Unsettling," one wrote. "The villain Brittany is so hateable she feels real," said another. "A masterclass in narcissistic rage," claimed the New York Times. The public fell in love with hating Brittany. They dissected her tantrums, mocked her entitlement, and theorized about the toxic family dynamics that created her. They had no idea they were analyzing a biography. The most delicious irony, however, came from the source herself. A week after my book hit the shelves, Tiffany posted a photo on Instagram. She was lounging by the pool at our parents' house, wearing oversized sunglasses and holding a copy of The Glass Menagerie. The caption read, "So proud of my big sis at Brandi writes, finally reading her little fiction book. It's a bit dark for my taste, I prefer things that are uplifting and true, like my memoir coming soon, but support is support. Sisters, #writer life. She hadn't read it. Or if she had, her narcissism acted as a shield deflecting any recognition. She saw the character of Brittany, a woman who stole, lied, and manipulated, and didn't see a reflection. She likely saw a rival. She was so convinced of her own perfection that the concept of being the villain was a cognitive impossibility. Then came the trigger. The trap I had written into Chapter 12. In my novel, the character Brittany realizes her credit cards are maxed out right before a planned girls' trip to Tulum. To fund it, she starts a charity drive for a neighbor with cancer, pockets the cash, and goes on the trip claiming the vacation was sponsored by a brand. It was a specific gritty detail I had included because I knew Tiffany's spending habits and I knew her lack of moral boundaries. I didn't know exactly how it would play out in reality, but I knew the pattern. History, as they say, doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. 2 weeks after my book release, and 1 week before her memoir dropped, Tiffany posted a tearful video. She was heartbroken, she said, because an old family friend, Mrs. Gable, had lost her home in a minor kitchen fire. Tiffany set up a GoFundMe titled "Rebuild the Gable Home," urging her followers to donate. "Every dollar counts," she wept, wiping a tear from a perfectly contoured cheek. "Let's show the world what community means." The campaign raised $6,000 in 48 hours. 3 days later, Tiffany posted from Cabo San Lucas. She didn't even try to hide it. She posted stories of margaritas, ocean views, and a luxury suite tagging the resort. When a follower asked in the comments, "Wow, expensive trip, how's Mrs. Gable?" Tiffany replied, "This was a pre-planned brand partnership, totally separate. Mrs. Gable is so grateful for everyone's help. But the internet is a hive mind, and it was already primed." A book talk creator named @LiteraryLark, who had just finished reviewing my book, made the connection first. She posted a video with a split screen. One side showed the text from Chapter 12 of The Glass Menagerie, describing Brittany's charity scam. The other side showed Tiffany's GoFundMe, followed immediately by her Cabo posts. The caption simply read, "Guys, I think the book is real." It went viral overnight. The hashtag #TheGlassMenagerie started trending not just as a book discussion, but as an investigation. Thousands of readers became amateur sleuths. They combed through Tiffany's old posts and compared them to the chapters in my book. Chapter 4, Brittany slashes her ex-boyfriend's tires. Reddit finds a police report from 3 years ago, filed by Tiffany's ex. Chapter 8. Brittany fakes a pregnancy scare to get out of a speeding ticket. Twitter finds a tweet from Tiffany 4 years ago joking about crying her way out of a ticket. The realization rippled through the internet: Brandi Gray hadn't written a novel. She had written an exposé and disguised it as entertainment. The pre-order sales for Tiffany's memoir, The Perfect Nest, plummeted, but the interest in it skyrocketed for the wrong reasons. People weren't buying it to read her inspiring journey. They were buying it to cross-reference the lies. When The Perfect Nest finally launched, it was a massacre. Readers spotted the libel I had left in. They spotted the contradictions. They realized that while Brandi's fiction felt true, Tiffany's memoir felt like fiction. My parents, true to form, tried to defend her. They issued a statement on Facebook calling the accusations cyberbullying and threatening legal action against, well, everyone. They claimed Tiffany used her own savings for Cabo. They claimed I was a jealous sister trying to sabotage the family brand. They doubled down, anchoring themselves to the sinking ship. Which brings us back to the Pierre Hotel. I was standing on the stage, the heavy glass trophy for Best Debut Novel cool in my hands. I had just finished my acceptance speech, a short, humble acknowledgement of the power of storytelling, when the double doors at the back of the ballroom banged open. It wasn't security. It was a scene straight out of a soap opera, or perhaps straight out of Chapter 20. Tiffany marched in mascara, running, wearing a dress that was slightly too tight. My parents flanked her, My father red-faced and blustering, my mother looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. The room silenced instantly. The literary elite of New York love drama, provided it happens at a safe distance. "You!" Tiffany screamed, pointing a finger at me. The acoustics of the ballroom carried her shrill voice to the rafters. "You ruined everything, you liar!" Security guards started to move, but I held up a hand. "Let them speak," I said into the microphone. I wanted this. I needed the world to see them not through the filter of my prose, but in the raw, ugly flesh. My father stormed toward the stage, stopping at the foot of the stairs. "You ungrateful child!" He spat, his voice shaking with the rage of a man losing control. "You wrote those lies about your sister. You destroyed her reputation. We are going to sue you for every penny you've made. That book is defamation." I looked down at them from the podium. I felt no fear. I felt no anger. I only felt the cool detachment of the narrator delivering the final lines. "Defamation?" I asked, my voice amplified and calm. "Father, the book is labeled fiction. It says so right on the cover. If you and Tiffany see yourselves in the villains I created, if you recognize your own actions in the behavior of monsters, that isn't a lawsuit. That's a confession." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls in a cliché so perfect I almost wished I had written it. "We loved you," she wailed. "We did everything for you, and you mock us." "You didn't love me," I corrected gently. "You tolerated me because I required zero effort. You loved the reflection of yourselves you saw in her." I gestured to Tiffany, who was now sobbing, checking her phone to see if anyone was live streaming. They were. "Who would believe you anyway?" Tiffany shrieked, looking for an audience. "You've always been the jealous one. You have no proof. It's just your word against ours." That was the cue. From the shadows of the wings, S.J. Vance stepped forward. She wasn't wearing her glasses tonight. She walked to the microphone, her heels clicking rhythmically on the stage floor. She placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that felt like a shield wall. She looked out at the audience, then down at my parents. "Actually," Vance said, her voice dropping the professional publisher veneer and adopting a tone of cold personal recognition, "it's not just her word." She looked directly at my mother. "Do you remember me, Mrs. Gray? Probably not. You never looked at anyone who couldn't do something for you. But I remember you. I remember your silver sedan. I remember the license plate." My mother squinted, confusion warring with panic. "Who are you?" "I'm the publisher," Vance said. "But before that, I was Brandi's roommate. 7 years ago, I sat on a concrete barrier in a university parking lot for 4 hours. I watched Brandi wait for you. I watched her check her phone. I saw her face when you called to say you weren't coming because Tiffany broke a nail." The room went deathly silent. This wasn't literary gossip anymore. This was an indictment. I watched her take off her cap and gown and put them in a bag because she was too ashamed to wear them alone. Vance continued, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed rage. "I didn't approach her then because I didn't know what to say, but I swore that if I ever got the chance to make sure she was heard, I would take it." Vance turned to the audience, addressing the room, the cameras, and the world. "I didn't publish this book because it was a thriller. I published it because it is an affidavit. I am the witness. And unlike you," she looked back at my parents, "I didn't leave her behind." The silence held for one heartbeat, 2, 3. And then the room erupted. It wasn't polite applause this time. It was a roar of support, a thunderous condemnation of the people standing on the floor. My father looked around, realizing the tide hadn't just turned, it had crashed down upon them. Tiffany stopped crying and looked at her phone, seeing the comments flooding in on the live streams. Trash. Horrible parents. Justice for Brandi. The narrative was sealed. They hadn't just lost the argument, they had lost the war. And as security finally moved in to escort them out, I didn't look away. I watched them go, finally understanding that by writing their ending, I had begun my own. The morning after the Golden Quill Awards, the world felt different, lighter. The air in my apartment was no longer thick with the stale anxiety of waiting for the other shoe to drop. The shoe had dropped, and it had crushed the people who deserved it. I sat at my kitchen island with a cup of coffee and my laptop watching the digital fallout of the night before. Sarah's speech had been viewed 4 million times in 12 hours. The internet, usually a chaotic and fickle beast, had found a singular narrative it could sink its teeth into. The invisible child versus the narcissists. The comments section, once a place I feared, was now a chorus of validation. Strangers were sharing their own stories of being the glass child, the one looked through to see the golden sibling. My parents and Tiffany weren't just villains in my life anymore. They were avatars for a universal grievance. But the social media shaming was just the weather. The legal destruction was the climate change. It started 3 days later. Because I had followed my parents' instructions to the letter, correcting Tiffany's grammar while leaving her facts unchecked, the perfect nest had gone to print, filled with actionable libel. Tiffany, in her desperation to make her life seem spicy and dramatic, had included a chapter about our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. She had written with absolute unfounded confidence that Mrs. Henderson's divorce 10 years ago was due to a sordid affair with the pool boy. It was a lie Tiffany had heard as a teenager and accepted as gospel because it was entertaining. I knew the truth. Mrs. Henderson's husband had gambled away their savings, but I hadn't corrected it. The process server arrived at my parents' door on a Thursday. Mrs. Henderson wasn't suing for a heartfelt apology. She was suing for damages, emotional distress, and defamation of character, and she wasn't alone. Mr. Clark, the high school teacher Tiffany claimed was a functional alcoholic, to explain why she failed his class, joined the fray. The beauty of the trap was that my parents couldn't blame me. I had the emails. "It's ready." I didn't change her voice. "It's pure Tiffany." My father's reply. "Great job, sport," was the nail in their legal coffin. They had signed off on the manuscript. They had published it. The words were theirs, and now so was the liability. The sponsor exodus followed with the speed of a startled flock of birds. Tiffany's mommy blog had been banking on contracts with a diaper company, a stroller brand, and an organic baby food line. These companies are risk-averse. They sell safety and wholesomeness. They do not sell fraud and familial abuse. One by one, the press releases dropped. "We are severing ties with Tiffany Gray. We do not condone the behavior exhibited. Our brand stands for integrity." Tiffany didn't just lose her income, she lost her identity. She was no longer an influencer. She was a cautionary tale. She was radioactive, a term I heard a PR crisis manager use on a morning talk show while discussing the scandal. Then came the call I knew was inevitable. It was 2 weeks post-gala. My phone buzzed on the counter. "Dad." I let it ring 4 times before answering, putting it on speaker so I could continue chopping vegetables for dinner. "Hello, Dad?" I said, my voice calm. "Brandi," he started, and the bluster was gone. The booming authority that had commanded me to edit manuscripts and fix routers was replaced by a trembling, pathetic wheedle. "Brandi, it's a nightmare. You have to stop this." "Stop what?" I asked, slicing a red pepper. "I'm not doing anything. I'm making dinner." "The lawsuits," he stammered. "The lawyers are talking about garnishing wages. They're talking about liens. And Tiffany, she's a mess, Brandi. She can't leave the house. The paparazzi are parked on the lawn." "That sounds difficult," I said. "But I don't see how that involves me." "We need money, Brandi." He snapped, the old entitlement leaking through the cracks in his fear. "You're making a fortune on that book. The sales are through the roof. We need a loan. Just until this blows over, to cover the retainers for the defense attorneys. We're family. You can't let us lose the house." I stopped chopping. I thought about the house. I thought about the mortgage they had taken out to pay for Tiffany's marketing package, the marketing that had just broadcast her libel to the world. I thought about the graduation ceremony. I thought about the tuition I paid myself. "You leveraged the house on a gamble, Dad," I said. "You bet on Tiffany. You bet everything on the golden child because you thought she was the sure thing. You thought I was just the support staff. Brandi, please, he begged. Don't be cruel. I'm not being cruel, I said, borrowing a line from chapter 23 of my own novel, a line the critics had called icily precise. I'm being logical. My finances are tied up in my future. I can't invest in a sinking ship. You should ask Tiffany. She's the star, isn't she? Stars always find a way to shine. She has nothing, he screamed. She's ruined. Then perhaps I said she should learn to code. I hung up. I blocked the number. It was the most satisfying silence of my life. A few days later, I drove out to the suburbs. I didn't go to visit. I went to witness. I parked my car down the street near the spot where Mrs. Henderson lived and looked at my childhood home. It looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of the grandeur my parents had always tried to project. The lawn, usually manicured to within an inch of its life, was overgrown. And there, planted firmly in the center of the yard like a tombstone, was a for sale sign. The windows were open, likely to let in a breeze since they probably couldn't afford to run the AC anymore. I could hear voices drifting out to the street. It wasn't the happy chatter of the perfect nest. It was screaming. High-pitched, hysterical screaming. It's your fault. That was Tiffany. You told me it was good. You told me to write it. We gave you everything. That was my mother, her voice cracking. We gave you the equity. We gave you the spotlight. You gave me nothing but pressure, Tiffany shrieked back. I rolled up my window. I didn't need to hear the rest. They were trapped together in the wreckage they had built, cannibalizing each other because there was no one left to feed on. I put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving the cul-de-sac behind. The rearview mirror framed the house for a fleeting second, shrinking it until it was just a speck, and then with a turn of the wheel, it was gone. I drove back toward the city, toward the skyline that looked like promise, realizing that the best revenge wasn't just exposing them, it was outgrowing them. The house of cards had fallen, and I was finally completely standing on solid ground. The bankruptcy filings were a matter of public record, accessible to anyone with an internet connection and a sense of schadenfreude. I didn't need to look them up, but my lawyer sent them over anyway, attached to a final invoice for the estate planning I was now wealthy enough to require. The document was a dry, bureaucratic autopsy of my parents' life. It detailed the second mortgage, the maxed-out credit cards used to buy Tiffany's designer wardrobe, the personal loan taken against my father's 401k to fund the launch party for a book that was now being pulped by the crate. They had gambled on the idea that appearance was currency, believing that if they just looked rich and successful enough, the money would magically follow. They had forgotten the foundational American value that actually builds wealth work. They had invested in a mirage, and when the wind shifted, they were left eating sand. The house was gone. The furniture was auctioned. They were moving into a 2-bedroom rental in a town 3 counties over, a place where nobody knew their names, and more importantly, where nobody cared. I was moving too, but my trajectory was vertical. I packed the last box in my Upper West Side apartment, not with a sense of loss, but with the efficiency of someone upgrading their operating system. I was buying a loft in Tribeca, a space with high ceilings and enormous windows that let the light flood in, no more hiding in the shadows, no more making myself small so others could feel big. As I taped the box shut, I realized I was leaving behind more than just square footage. I was leaving behind the identity of the invisible daughter. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was high definition. I was the author of the year. I was the woman who had turned her trauma into a tax bracket. A week later, I met Sarah at a cafe in the West Village, a quiet place with marble tables and the smell of roasted hazelnut. She was no longer just S.J. Vance, the mysterious publisher. She was my business partner, my friend, and the only person who knew the topography of my scars. She slid a cappuccino across the table toward me. "The final royalty check for the quarter," she said, tapping a thick envelope. "And the rights for the streaming series adaptation are officially signed. You're going to need a better accountant, Brandi." I took a sip of the coffee, letting the warmth settle in my chest. It's strange, I admitted. I thought I would feel more triumphant, like standing over a defeated enemy. But mostly, I just feel relieved. It's like a noise that's been humming in the background of my life for 29 years has finally stopped. Sarah nodded, her eyes sharp and knowing. That's because it wasn't about revenge, really. It was about correction. Physics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Your parents spent decades pushing you down to lift Tiffany up. All you did was step out of the way and let gravity take over. They fell because they were never standing on solid ground to begin with. She paused, looking out the window at the busy street. You know the media is still spinning this as a tragedy for them, the fall of the House of Grey, but I see it as a victory for the system. It proves that you can't fake it forever. Meritocracy still has a pulse. They wanted the American dream, I mused, but they wanted the version from the commercials, the instant gratification, the lottery win. They didn't want the grit. They didn't want the resilience. I traced the rim of my cup. I think that's why the public turned on them so hard. It wasn't just the lies. It was the entitlement. People hate seeing someone cut the line. And Tiffany, she thought the line didn't apply to her. And now she's working retail, Sarah noted not unkindly, but with a factual finality. I heard she got a job at a boutique in Jersey. It's honest work, probably the first honest thing she's ever done. Maybe it'll be good for her. Maybe, I said. But that's not my plotline anymore. I've written them out of the script. And we sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city move past us. New York is a city of survivors, of people who came here to rewrite their own stories. I fit in now. I wasn't the girl waiting in the parking lot anymore. I was the girl sitting at the table deciding what to order next. 3 months later, I sat behind a table at a bookstore in Union Square. The line wound around the block. People were holding copies of The Glass Menagerie of Suburbia, the covers creased from reading. I signed name after name, smiling, making eye contact, acknowledging each person. I saw a young girl, maybe 20, standing nervously at the front of the line. She looked tired. She looked like she had studied too hard and slept too little. She looked like she was waiting for someone to tell her she did a good job. "Hi," she whispered, sliding the book toward me. I just wanted to say thank you. My sister is the favorite. My parents, they don't really see me. Reading this, it made me feel like I wasn't crazy. It made me feel like I could survive it." I stopped. I looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the ghost of myself in her anxious posture. I signed the book to the one who does the work. "You are the protagonist, Brandi." I handed it back to her. "You won't just survive it," I told her, my voice firm. "You'll outgrow it. Keep the receipts. Write it down. Your success is the best revenge you will ever get." The girl smiled, a genuine, tearful smile, and walked away a little taller than she had arrived. The event manager stepped up as the line finally dwindled to nothing. "Brandi, that was amazing. We've sold out of every copy." He hesitated, then leaned in. "Everyone is asking the same thing. The ending of the book. It's so final. But the family is still out there. The drama is still real. Are you going to write a sequel, The Glass Menagerie Part 2? People want to know what happens next to Brittany and the parents." I capped my pen. The sharp click echoed in the quiet space. I looked at Sarah, who was standing by the door, leaning against the frame with a proud smirk. Then I looked back at the manager. I thought about the "for sale" sign on the lawn. I thought about my father's desperate phone call. I thought about the silence of the parking lot 7 years ago and the noise of the applause in the ballroom. "No," I said, standing up and smoothing down my jacket. "There won't be a sequel." "Why not?" he asked, surprised. "It would be a bestseller." I picked up my bag, slinging it over my shoulder. "Because," I said, smiling, a real smile, one that reached my eyes. "That book was historical fiction. I'm done living in the past. I'm writing about the future now." I walked out of the bookstore and into the crisp autumn air of Manhattan. The sun was setting, painting the skyscrapers in shades of gold and violet. The city was loud, chaotic, and beautiful. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, clean air of freedom. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me but ghosts and fiction. Ahead of me, the streetlights were just turning on, illuminating the path forward one step at a time. And that brings us to the end of Brandi's journey, proving that sometimes the sharpest weapon isn't a sword but a pen. If you enjoyed this tale of literary justice, please hit that subscribe button and let us know what you think below. We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Ashes of Revenge. We'll see you next time.